thank you for getting up early and coming here for the last day. I hope you've had a great conference so far. And for the ones who just arrived, welcome to the conference. We're going to present financing carbon farming with insights from both global and regional as well as local perspectives. And as we've heard from Kurt Vanderburg, this summit has been designed to function as a catalyst for collaborative action. And this group, with its breadth and reach, as well as different focus on a variety of stakeholders involved in carbon farming, is perhaps a testament to this being a successful part. So, out of the 5 perspectives that we will hear, we will start with a new private financial piece of architecture that has a global reach involving the corporate sector in a meaningful way. Then we will follow through to a European-focused study on a decision support framework for design and scalability. Then this will be followed by a regional study on the importance of biodiversity as a co-benefit when working with carbon farming, and then finishing with 2 national examples, one on the crucial elements of environmental agreements, and the other on how to include medium and small-sized farms. So the presenters are going to get to present themselves because they do that best. And after which we'll hear all the presentations, and we won't stop in the middle, but at the end we will open up for questions on all the presentations. So we'll save all that to the end. So without much further ado, I will kick off. My name is Åsa Lind, and I work for Initiative 1415. I am a barrister and solicitor by trade, and also an environmental scientist. I started as a banking and finance lawyer once upon a time, and have since taught at university in the area of eco-technology and sustainable development. Also, before joining 1415, I was in a research project for the Swedish Department of Energy for a number of years. And today I am Chief Legal Officer with 1415. And starting our presentation from 1415 is Christopher Bonde.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Bonde. I'm CEO of Initiative 1415. My background is from the financial industry, in 25 years, trading currencies, interest rates, and equities, and got a quite deep background and understanding for market functionalities. And the last 10 years was with Nordea. It's one of the largest Nordic banks. And I was head of sustainability at the Nordea Financial Institution Group. And we were covering basically all the large asset managers. And we did a couple of surveys. One was regarding the Sustainable Development Goals and how they ranked those one. And number 13 was top ranked. This was back in 2016. And we wanted to investigate the circumstances around that, and it cooked down to matter about the emissions and how to hedge emissions from portfolios that had quite large emissions on the book. And then we got the question from the second National Pension Fund about ways to handle or to hedge those carbon footprints. And so we started, they should not use the ETS, they should use a nature-based solution. So we started to calculate on that. And that was interesting work. And at the same time, or a year after, the European Commission decided to start a technical expert group, and that was about the Green Bond Standard, the disclosure, the reporting CSRD, as you probably are quite well aware of. And that's something that we have with us in the background here in our presentation, the reporting, because it's very, very important that we have this reporting in place to understand the material we're working with. And I think I stop there. Thank you.
Right. So, first slide, please. And you click it. Oh, it's working. Perfect. So, Initiative 1415 is an operator. So, we aim to preserve and enhance biodiversity, create healthy ecosystems, and increase carbon sequestration in the land and water. And we have three core business areas, and that's to preserve and enhance marine and coastal ecosystems, restore and improve terrestrial ecosystems, and optimize and increase forest carbon sequestration. And the three key challenges, but they can also be seen as opportunities that we will address today, include how to navigate and align with the regulatory landscape and all the EU policies, how to work with several tools simultaneously, and how private finance can fill the serious gap in finance that we have in most European countries. And to kick this off, I'm not going to terrify you with this map, but, or am I? No.
One slide innan också.
Här ja, var är den då? No. Jag tog den. So, can you hear me well, by the way? I've got a sort of, okay, perfect. So what are we looking at here? As I said, we need to work with several things simultaneously, and I think that's something that we've all, come to realize. And we can be assisted in this by looking at the regulatory framework and the related strategies. So here we've got, predominantly out of the Green Deal and the European bioeconomy, a sort of landscape to navigate. And if we hone in here on the area of the carbon removal and carbon farming certification framework, which is, why this conference is going on, we need to talk about carbon. And so when we talk about that, and when we work with that, it interrelates and has synergies between other frameworks. And of interest here, for example, is the Nature Restoration Regulation. And that has the national plans that need to be completed. The first lot that's going to be sent to the EU Commission will be mid of this year. Now, this is intended to cover a significant portion of land in all of Europe. So it's very important to have this in mind when we also talk about working with carbon. So we at 1415, we sit in 5 of the groups that give advice on this plan. And we're always trying to say, okay, let's look at the synergies and what policies we have to make all this work in time is of the essence, I think we can say. So how do we do this in the best way? How do we find these synergies? And so from a project developer perspective, it's so important to participate in this process, we think. So we are sitting with the Department of Agriculture, the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, the Forest Agency, financing, and also I sit in a group that advise on legal drafting. And what we're seeing is that when we connect the carbon removal certification framework to the nature restoration regulation plans, it isn't so that all the policies align. The coin hasn't sort of landed, or the eagle hasn't landed everywhere, where people are seeing these synergies and how, for example, we can work with credits, how finance can work. So we're in this process right now, all of us, I'd say, that if we want the CRCF to work, function properly, and the nature restoration plans, the national plans, we need to find these synergies better, and we need to look at finance in a positive way here. So where else can we look on this map to find synergies? We have what Christopher just mentioned before, the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and under that a number of rules under the ESRS. The first one, they're quite easy to read, and the first one is about climate change, and the fourth one is about biodiversity and ecosystems. So when we're talking about working with carbon. So if we're talking about carbon farming under the CRCF, there's a mandatory part that we work with biodiversity as a co-benefit. And if we then look at how companies report, we see under the CSRD and ESRS that we will know what the effect they have and what they could actually work with. So here we're starting to see synergies for how we can work with this. So what am I saying? I'm saying that when we work with carbon farming, we have the opportunity to also work with several other areas. In fact, we have to do work with biodiversity, for example. So when you design projects and develop tools and also develop financial mechanisms, we should take all of this into consideration, which is what we do. And I would like to add as well that the government policies and EU policies need to be aligned across the board here, so throughout the bioeconomy. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're making plans that can create path dependencies and lock-in effects later on. So we need to think about energy when we're talking about carbon. We need, this whole landscape fits together in one part. It's system thinking and system planning. So this is actually a landscape of opportunity. It first looks daunting. And our clients come to us, they are actually always, or I'd say 90% of the time, quite concerned about the laws, and particularly like the regulation coming out of the EU. But we don't see it as this sort of wet blanket on operations. We see it as a map and a compass for how we can do business. How can we create great projects? How can we get more people involved? How can we do better? How can we bring in social aspects, employment, all these different things? It's all here in this map, I would say. So when we design projects, what our clients will say is that now their attitude changes. There's a different tone about both the EU and about the regulation. And I think I'll leave that map there. So what are we doing? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Well, to tackle biodiversity and the climate crisis, and actually what we've got is a 5 interlinked crisis. We should also talk about water and health. So climate change is, of course, a big part in this. So all of this work, how do we tackle this when the government budgets decrease? Because if we look at doing business as usual, we're looking at intergenerational failure, basically. And the great path here, you see, that if we stick to just the government budget, it's not going to be enough. And I'll leave over to you, Christopher.
Thank you. Well, the grey path, as you see here, it's a way that we don't want to walk down, or the road that we don't want to walk down. And if we get the next slide, please. And when we start to get some understanding for what the government can do, we need to go into the budget. And here we give you an example of the Swedish government budget. And as you see here on the gray line, it's expenditure area 20, which is about climate, environment, and nature. And for 2025, it was 17 billion SEK, and corresponding to 1.6 billion euros. And when you look into 26 and 27, you see that it increased somewhat, but 28 we're back at 1.6 billion euros. And in terms of what we need to do to achieve the goals to 2030, you quickly understand that with the government money, we will be stuck on the grey path, as you saw on previous slide. And you can also see on this that the increase, 26 and 27, it's mainly due to charging infrastructure and charging stations and EVs discounts. And also interesting, if we, which is not on this slide, but if you look on the income side, for example, from the ETS, Sweden get money, and that's corresponding to 250 million euros. But that's a tax. The ETS is a tax. It's just going into the system. It should be earmarked for those kind of measures, but we don't really know that. That information we don't get. Okay, so we are, with the government money, we are stuck on a gray path, and we can take the next slide, please. And the gray, in the gray here you see the Swedish budget. Here we look at 25, corresponding to 28. And then you see the blue ones is money from the European Union, and it's increased somewhat. And this is also interesting because when the European Commission release money for this area, climate, environment, and nature, it looks at the first view, it looks to be a significant amount of money. But then you split that on 27 countries. And Sweden is a quite small country, so we even won't be on that split for 27. I mean, France and Spain will probably get more money. So when we look at this blue part here, that's a really optimistic view from a Swedish perspective that we get. And then we ask the question, what money do we need to achieve the goals in Sweden? And what's the financing gap in Sweden to reach the goals? And we are involved in the, as also mentioned, in the National Restoration Plan. And we've been calculating on this in Initiative 1415. And there is 2 billion euros in financing gap on annual basis, which means that until 2050, there is 50 billion euros. And the National Restoration Plan, they are sent out to the government, the first draft of how to achieve the plan. And they say that there is a significant financing gap in the plan. And the plan has, there's no financing for the plan. Okay, next slide, please. So we need to solve the problem to finance this gap in some way. And we know in Sweden we have an election later this year, and no of the parties will go up in that election by saying we're going to raise the taxes and allocate that to Area 20 with about 20 billion SEK or 2 billion euros. That's not going to happen. No one will take that because they're going to lose voters in the election, and they're not going to win the election. Okay, so we just need to workshop and think. We need to find another flow here, another way to do it. Because in Sweden, we have a generational goal, and that generational goal is decided from the government, and that is to hand over to the next generation a society in which the major environmental problems are solved. But as you see now, that's clearly not going to happen. We're not going to reach that goal. We're pretty far away from doing that. And you can go back also. And we have the Climate Policy Council in Sweden and the Swedish EPA. They've been warning about this several times. And if you look at, we have, I think it's 26 different county administrative board in Sweden, and under this generational goal, there's 16 environment goals. I mean, one of them are, of course, climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and so on. And the reports from, I could say, all of them, is that we're heavily missing the targets. Of these 16 targets, between 12 and 13 on every report says they are missing. Maybe some countries report reach 1 or 2, but it's a disaster reporting to read. Yeah, and then we thought, how do we solve the problem? How do we get those money? How do we close the financing gap? And as we view it, as I mentioned, the voters will react tax increase. So that's not the way forward through the tax system. So the private financing is the possibility we have to reach the goal. And the funny thing is that if we finance the restoration plan, we have very good possibilities to reach the generational goal. Next one, please. So, welcome to the generational contribution. And this is about our kids and our grandkids. We want to hand over this society where we have handled those problems. And this is a tool, this is a suggestion that we serve to nation states in Europe. And this is designed outside the tax system and not included in national budgets, and that's very important. And the financing solution for the private sector to be involved is in a meaningful way. I mean, to do something for the next generation with directly impact on nature. And the good thing is that when we look at the nature restoration plans for Spain or for France or for Sweden, there is, of course, different priorities. I mean, Sweden have some priorities in the plan, and Spain will have some. So therefore, the priority in the measures will be decided by the government in the plans. But this system secure the money flows into those measures. Next slide, please. And this advice that the nation state decide when generational contribution takes effect, and that could be on then, CSRD, it hits large caps and then mid caps, small caps, and so on. And that's CSRD is already decided, and many large corps already report on it. And then it's also up to the government in each country to decide what scopes that should be included in the start. Only scope 1 or scope 1 and 2 or scope 1, 2, 3 to report on. Because that's the basis for calculating how much you should contribute to the generational contribution. And then it's proposed that 6% of the reported emission from the company will be used as a basis. And then also the government sets a reference price. It could be the ETS price, which now is about 70, 80 euros. And this constitutes the calculation basis of how much a company should contribute annually. Next one. And here we have another example. This is actually a law firm. A law firm, and they have in scope 1 and 2, they have 500 tons of CO2 emissions. And then we take 6% for an example then. I mean, if the government decided it should be 8 or 10%, well, it's up to them. And that corresponds then to 6% of 500 will be 30 tons. And then we price it on the carbon price that the government decides, 70 euros. So this company's generation contribution becomes 2,100 euros. And you know what happened when we presented this for them? They said, wow, but can't we do more? So now we are on the right side of the fence. Instead of talking taxes, tax hikes and so on, and problems, we're talking possibilities. We're talking the next generation, our kids and grandkids. And they say, wow, yeah, 2,100 euro, yeah, that's great, let's start. Okay, next one. And then we look into the government budget and what the generational contribution could do. And at the first row here for 2025, of course it will take time to implement this, but this is an example of what it could do. And the first row there with 2025, you see 47.5 million tons. That figure is from Swedish EPA and a couple of Swedish authorities, and that's an average on emissions from corporates in companies in Sweden. And then we take the generational contribution and take 6% out of that. That leaves us with 2,850,000 tons. And then we price that on the ETS, 756 krona or 70 euros. So that will lead us to 2,154,600 SEK into the generational contribution. And then we look at the total financing with the Swedish budget and the European Union financing. So that's 21 billion out there in the gray. So now we look at the green box and at the gray box. And then let's say we take another government, they decide to take 20%. All right, so in this case, the money from the generational contribution or into the buyers club, it could be, as you saw yesterday, would be about 7 billion SEK compared to 24. And if we twist it a bit more to 1/3, that the companies take responsibility for 1/3 of their emissions, we will land at basically the half, 11.6 billion, corresponding to, or looking at 23 billion from government financing and European financing. So that's basically half of it. And what's really interesting, when we ask the companies to take responsibility for 66%, 2/3 of their emissions, it's just the responsibility linked to their business. Look what we got. We're up to 22 billion from companies, and that's more than we get from the governments. So we have the possibilities to solve the problem. It's just about, do we want to do it or not? The possibility is there. And actually, in the bottom line, it's about responsibility to hand over the society that we want to hand over to our kids and grandkids. Next one, please. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And of course, there's a page for the generational contribution in 6 different languages. So you can get there through the generationcontribution.com if you would like to read more about that. And without much further ado, I now leave over to Pia. Nidhi? Okay, we've changed. Nidhi, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nidhi Raina. If I could have my presentation, yes. So I am a postdoc researcher at the University of Bologna. So I worked on carbon farming during my PhD thesis, which I finished last year. Right now, I'm at the intersection of carbon farming, soil health, and agri-environmental contracts, economics, and policies. So basically, this research today that I'm going to show is basically focusing on how carbon farming schemes can be designed to be both economically viable for the farmers and credible from an environmental perspective. These are the results from my PhD research and helps to decipher an efficient carbon farming incentive mechanism that can be then applied by all different kinds of stakeholders throughout the value chain of a carbon farming scheme. So without further ado, I begin. So yeah, why this research? Basically, carbon farming, the interest of European Commission in carbon farming started in June 2021. Before that, there was also voluntary carbon markets, the Kyoto Protocol, the CDM. But as I started my PhD and as European Commission started its interest, I also started researching into what could be a good mechanism, incentive mechanism specifically, for the EU to adopt and what kind of, how does carbon farming fit into EU's climate policies or EU's agri-environmental policies. So just to understand that, I did literature scoping to understand what are the different kinds of gaps in knowledge, which I understood that there are lots of risks for the stakeholders. So there is patchy contractual solutions. There are high setup costs. There's lack in MRV that are standardized. And there's also uncertain revenues for the farmers and for the other people throughout the value chain. So also for the project developers and also for the financiers. What are the project developers' preferences? So my idea was not to look very farmer-centric, but also to look more top-down from the idea of the project implementation and project design perspective to see the people who design it, what they are thinking, or what is their motivation, what is their intention. And I wanted to answer the big question, whether it's a climate policy tool, or whether it's a business model, or whether it's both. So what I realized that the challenge was not carbon prices only, it is also contract design. And for me, taking that forward, taking the contract design as a challenge, I tried to then further my research. So I used the perspectives of global experts from not just Europe, because Europe was just setting up carbon farming back then, but also from Australia, US, and a lot of clean development mechanisms and PES schemes across Africa, across other developing countries. So I also looked into international experts. I interviewed all of them and studied the case studies they were part of. These experts were the ones who had designed and implemented these carbon farming schemes on the ground. Some of them were just purely researchers, but most of them were the ones who had actually been on ground designing and implementing these schemes. And I tested how different contract design attributes actually impact the project performance of a carbon farming project. In my research, I realized that there are different kinds of payment modes and different kinds of payment sources, and then how everybody is connected to the carbon markets is something like this, that if farmers are paid on the results, then they are connected to the carbon markets, but if they are only paid for the practices they do, usually they are not connected to the carbon markets unless they are in a hybrid scheme. There are very less hybrid schemes, and the funders and intermediaries vary depending on what kind of payments there are and who is the buyer. And depending on the buyer, the carbon market works. My research design after doing the literature scoping began like this. I took 18 contract design attributes. 18 is very less, but it could have gone more. But for now, I tested for 18. And almost 8 performance indicators. The performance indicators were the ones that count the success of a carbon farming project. So these could be economic, or this could be environmental. So environmental could be additionality, permanence, and economic could be farmer participation or access to the carbon markets. And these contract design attributes also I segregated into 4 different factors. The fundamental factors that exist in any contract, in any agri-environmental scheme per se, incentives that were very specific to a carbon farming contract design, compliance mechanisms also very specific to a carbon farming contract design, and support structures that should be in any contract design that are agri-environmental schemes. These support structures being training, advisory. What stakeholders prefer? So in my results, I could see that one thing that in fact, the 2 things that all the experts that we interviewed collectively preferred was training and hybrid payments. So we wanted train and support farmers, like they wanted train and support farmers and use hybrid payments, not just result-based, not just action-based, but both. Also, they preferred certification, which is very weird because they ranked MRV, stringent MRV, very low. So maybe certification with its own incentive attached to it has better preference among the experts. Also, the interesting things were that private incentives, whether it be market-based or whether it be supply chain-based, supply chain being in-setting, they were preferred higher than public incentives, but payments based on practices were preferred more than payments based on results. This is 2 contrasting results that we got, but yeah, we looked more into it. I also divided my stakeholders into different kinds of, experts into different kinds of stakeholders. So I had financiers, I had government agents, I had intermediaries, I had policy experts, and I had research institutes. And from this you can see that even though there's high consensus on the two most important contract design, that is the hybrid payments and the training, however, the incentive-oriented attributes show very high divergence. For example, the public incentives is highly preferred by the government agents, but is not preferred at all by the financiers. And the private incentives, again, are preferred by the intermediaries and the financiers, but not by the government agencies, policy experts, and research institutes. Similarly, if you pay the farmer just based on changing their practices, that is preferred highly by the policy experts. However, if you pay them by results, is something that is obviously preferred by the financiers. So we could see there's a coherence of alignment in preferences between government agencies, policy experts, and research institutes, and another alignment between financiers and intermediaries. So when we bring all of these different stakeholders to a table to discuss a carbon farming contract design, this is something we can keep in mind of who wants what, and what is the motivation of different stakeholders for what kind of incentives or what kind of different attributes of a contract. This is my decision support framework which I then made based on these rankings and based on the different kinds of links I had with the literature. If you could just click that, moderator. Yes. Just a moment. I don't know if it shows. No, they can click it. If it's, okay, maybe. Yes. Yeah. So if you just click anywhere, the ones on the left are the different contract design attributes, and the size of the circle is how much they are preferred. So for example, we are at incentives, and the private market-based incentives are preferred highly, they rank at 6th. And how they connect with the different kinds of success factors is they are, for example, we are at baseline data, highly impacts additionality and net sequestration. So they contribute to the environmental success factors. Stakeholder engagement helps in farmer participation and contract compliance. Also, the circles on the right depend on how much they contribute to the success of a carbon farming project. Obviously, these attributes and performance indicators could have been much more in number, but for me, I stopped at this. This is what I based on basis of the CRCF's early drafts, that these are the things, at least what is EU looking into, and these are the indicators that I should put back. Yeah, I'll just quickly go back to the slide. But yes, if you want to look more into it, we can get in touch. But this is something that I provide as a toolkit for all kinds of stakeholders to use when designing a contract design, when implementing a contract design, to understand what fits with what and what will lead to success of what. So if we are looking at purely economic goals, what should we do? If we are looking at purely environmental goals, what we should do? But carbon farming is a mix of both. So we should remember that, and we should work according to that. Okay. I also had a very qualitative inquiry with more than 32 experts. I went and talked to almost 40 experts. And I found a lot of barriers that were not in literature, but I was able to find through talking to them, talking about their real life experiences. The important ones that I have here, and I would like to talk about, is, for example, the economic ones, that private contracts is more expensive, so there should be public schemes and there should be a combination of financing. For the environmental ones, they think climate risks and the climate change will either increase sequestration or decrease sequestration, it will depend, and they will hamper result-based contracts and they will hamper result-based payments. Carbon farming is not a long-term solution for climate policy, maybe for some other policy and maybe with a mix of policy tool, but not alone for not a solution alone for climate policy. That is the consensus of experts. And they obviously suggest calculating the temporary removals as well, because or else the farmers will be penalized just being in these contracts. There were interesting social barriers that I would like to talk about as well. One, the farmers are foremost food growers, and this is something we have been talking throughout the summit. But what we have not been talking about is how public is skeptic about these carbon farming projects and about the motivation of big businesses and their offsetting mechanisms. So there is a slight more interest and trust in insetting rather than offsetting. And then people from CDM projects, from Clean Development Mechanism projects and PES projects, so experts from Uganda, experts from developing countries, also said there could be green colonialism, where the developed country will push or is pushing the developing countries to grow carbon for offsetting their own emissions. And if the developing countries refuse, or if the farmers refuse, they will put sanctions on them, or they will not give them money, and they will incentivize their neighbor and not them. So it's kind of a green colonialism that somebody suggested is the word. So out of all of this, after all this inquiry, I was able to build this hybrid blend model in which I present hybrid payments, which is a mix of both action-based and result-based, in a way that the payments should be primarily action-oriented with some outcome-based rewards at the end that are financed through private financing. So, the public financing upfront, which is action-oriented, which covers farmers' transaction costs, rewards the co-benefits being biodiversity, soil health, water retention, everything related to increasing the ecosystem services from the soil, even social co-benefits, and reduces the farmer's risk. And then there's private finance as a reward for the outcomes, which preferably should be supply chain based and could have been product premiums or buyer incentives, and now we know also about the EU Buyers Club, and maybe we can have a better idea of how they can finance. That should be blended with low-cost MRV and public certification, simple MRV rules with public certification like obviously CRCF, and also something that is already existing like label bar carbon. The enabling conditions would be support structures for sure, so providing the farmers with training and advisory, having farmer cooperation with each other, having stakeholder engagement horizontally and vertically throughout the supply chain, throughout the value chain of the carbon farming credits, baseline data, availability of that, and having liability mechanisms. This is all CRCFs, what they have suggested. The enabling conditions are there. And even in the liability mechanisms, it's always better to have buffer pools than discounting, which I felt from talking to the experts, because buffer pools are more incentivizing, not penalizing. Yeah, from this to nature credits. So nature credits is EU's new way of including all the different kinds of ecosystem services and incentivizing all the different kinds of ecosystem services. What we presented, the hybrid blend model, is very similar to the design of the new nature credits logic. And we offer this toolkit, and we offer this incentive mechanism that can be an efficient contractual solution, and it can pull private buyers, because we hope that it will be rewarding for all the stakeholders. So it will not put too much pressure on the private financiers to also pay for co-benefits, to also pay for farmers' risks, but only pay them for the results. Yeah, it's a bit of a dream. So also EU aims to use CRCF's mandatory biodiversity co-benefits as a precedent for the nature credits logic. And my research treats co-benefits as very contract relevant, and it is more molded into contract performance logic and is not just an optional add-on. And we also suggest a policy stack instrument for how the different policies can stack and how we can scale from just carbon removals to full range of ecosystem services. I have not put that in here, but we can talk about it later. So what I need from you, if you're a policymaker or EU institution, I would like to get in touch especially for CRCF-aligned initiatives, and explore if there is a willingness to pilot test this incentive model. If you're a project developer or an intermediary, I'm very interested in knowing about this research in real-time experience, about these contract experiences, and also understanding how things look on ground and if this can become a reality or not, or if this is too far-fetched. And if you're a fellow researcher like me, I'm on a stage where this framework is ready to be executed and it's ready to be bring into carbon or nature market design. And I would genuinely welcome collaborators who would want to build on this together, want to work on some nice economic models together. So yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Nidhi. Now we will move over to Pia Otter, and who will be talking about the importance of biodiversity co-benefits in carbon farming programs and issues surrounding local and international carbon and nature credits. Pia.
Okay, does it work? Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Pia Otter. I'm a research professor from Ruralis, Institute for Rural and Regional Research in Norway. So I will bring you all the way to Norway now. This is the work I have been doing with my colleague Natalia Mæhle, who is a professor at Western Norway University of Applied Sciences, but also together with Marit Kracht from University of Western Australia and my colleague Maja Farstad from Ruralis. I will try to be quick. I just had to give you a bit of the background. So this project, this presentation is related to a research project that I'm leading. It's a Norwegian research project, but with international partners. And the aim is to design sustainable business models for carbon sequestration in Norwegian agriculture. It's a 3-year project. We have gotten quite far in the project. We also have a multi-actor platform in the project with different industry partners. One of them is here today, Einar from AgroSense. He's one of the multi-actor partners. Just this as a kind of background to the project, and I thought maybe you don't know so much about Norway. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Norway, but just to let you know that Norway is not part of the EU, but it has the EEA agreement, and this means that Norway follows a lot of the EU rules. Norwegian agriculture is very small scale. It's only 3% of the country that can be used for agriculture. And it's also, it has a special policy model. I don't want to go into detail of this now because I think we are running a bit out of time. But it's very different to the European system. It's very protected because without this model, the fear is that there wouldn't be any agriculture. Carbon farming is not widely implemented, but Norway plans to implement the CRCF because that goes across sectors, it's not only agriculture. So the main objective of my presentation today is to show the possibility of including co-benefits in form of biodiversity into carbon farming programs. So what we have been doing in the project is we have been talking to different stakeholders that would be relevant for implementing this and designing business models for the Norwegian context. So we have done interviews with European on-farm carbon credit providers, with Norwegian companies who would pay for carbon credits or who already pay for it or who might be interested in paying for it, and especially also we have talked to Norwegian farmers about this. So what I present to you is basically based on 7 semi-structured interviews with representatives of European on-farm carbon credits providers in 5 different countries. We had some cases in Austria, Germany, Sweden, Norway, and the Netherlands. We also conducted interviews with Norwegian companies, as I said, to identify their interest in carbon credits and co-benefits in form of biodiversity. These companies were represented from various industries, such as insurance, banking, research, construction, tourism, business development, and gardening. I must say it has been challenging to get these interviews. Companies are really busy, so that's why it's at the moment 7. We are still trying to get some more interviews. We have also carried out 12 interviews with Norwegian farmers to get some more insights, and based on these interviews we designed a survey, a national survey, where we got 400 farmers to reply to our survey to find out more about their interest in participating in a carbon farming program. So just briefly, some of our results. from the interviews with the Norwegian companies and the European carbon farming providers, we can see here that the preliminary results show that interviews with Norwegian companies, that they're interested in local carbon farming offsets and also to some degree into biodiversity as co-benefits. But it's very important that you can measure biodiversity. That's kind of criteria here. But challenges are the prices of local carbon offsets. The ones that we have per day in Norway, they're quite expensive. So a lot of these, like the Norwegian initiatives, they also include, and also the international ones, they also include international carbon credits because of the price, because it's cheaper. And then we also noticed that in the interviews that the focus on carbon is too narrow, which is also in alignment with the EU Commission's roadmap towards nature credits that also my colleagues here have already talked about. On-farm carbon credits provider indicated an interest in quantifying and selling biodiversity and other ecosystem services. And the good thing is, I mean, it's also basically related to what is happening at the EU level, is that they expect the market for holistic products to grow as the EU regulations oblige companies to report on biodiversity. So I go a bit to the results from the farmers. Maybe that's very interesting. I don't know, I noticed the last days that people were always like, oh, are you a farmer? Oh, I want to talk to you. So maybe we work a lot with farmers, so maybe I thought it's interesting for you to hear. For them, in the interviews, we could see that carbon credits was an unknown concept, and it had a kind of negative connotation because they were thinking of something with high interest rates when they heard the term. So for them, carbon certificates, I mean, this is qualitative interviews now, this is not like representative, but it's interesting to get these insights, were more a neutral term. And they were also talking about that carbon is maybe a kind of, you know, earlier political dream that you're not following anymore, so you should change the term. So the certificate was perceived as more clearly and reflecting higher quality. But then again, this was the qualitative study, so we're also looking into the quantitative, more representative aspects of it. So we sent a survey to 2,000 farmers randomly selected who had received area subsidies for growing grain on at least 100 acres in one or more of the years between 2015 and 2024. And we got 400 farmers to respond, which is actually not bad. It's a 20% response rate. Most of them were in eastern Norway and in Trøndelag, the different regions in Norway. And of course, we had mostly men because there are more male farmers. And the average age was 55, and 51% had a university level education. So I just present you with some really descriptive findings out of this survey. So the first one, what I think was really interesting, is we asked them whether they are familiar with the phenomenon of trading system based on agriculture-based measures. And here you can see that 87% said no. So there's basically no knowledge about carbon farming. We explained carbon farming before. It's something that is quite unknown. But then we also asked them, what if you were given the opportunity to participate in such a program? And when we look here at the data, again, it's not surprising that 41% say, I don't know, because they don't know about it. It's the first time many of them had heard about it in the survey. But 44% also said yes, which I think is for us, for developing business models, a nice approach that there is a kind of willingness or openness. The survey we carried out also included a discrete choice experiment conducted by my colleague Marit Kracht. And here we were looking into different, we call it attributes that would be relevant for designing the business model. So we checked, for example, what kind of focus of the scheme we should have. Should it be focused more on nature? Should it be focused more on climate? What kind of framing should we use for the marketing of this? We looked into the source of funding, because as I told you, in the Norwegian system, there's a lot of public funding support system. So how willing would be the farmers to get private funding, or how much would they like to stick to the public one? So we gave them different categories, 50 private, 50 government, 100 government, and so on. 3 different options. And then we asked them about the payment, whether it should be based on activity or result. And another option in the business model would be also to negotiate a discount with banks, with a bank loan or with insurances. In our multi-actor platform, we have some banks and insurance companies included who would be open for this, so we wanted to check whether this is an option for them. And so we made different alternatives in the choice experiment, and the fourth, of course, was saying, I don't know. I mean, if you really don't want to put any opinion, you put I don't know. And yeah. So when we look into the results, the interesting part is that nature was 20% more preferred than climate. So nature was very important. It was very important to have a lot of governmental funding, which is not surprising for us based on Norway's background, as I said before, with a lot of public finance. Payment-based was preferred, activity-based was preferred over result-based. Discount on loan, yeah, is not like the big thing, but you can include it. So to finalize, what do we learn from this? Where are we at this stage? I mean, this is an ongoing research project still, but we can see from the survey that farmers in Norway lack knowledge on carbon farming, and there is a strong need for more educational programs and do some work. It is clear that carbon credits should move beyond carbon and include co-benefits. Possibility to integrate this into one business model, that's something we are working on at the moment. We also see that the EU has to make sure what falls under sustainable co-benefits in the CRCF and what is going to be nature credits, so there's no double accounting and it's not going to be difficult for the farmers to include this. We need also to develop new scalable measurement tools, such as the use of soil DNA analysis to quantify biodiversity, and we need to establish more incentives for companies to buy carbon credits, and this can, I think, only happen through regulations. So for Norway, a scheme that focuses on nature instead of climate is preferred by farmers, and they also prefer when private funding is backed up with large governmental funding, where we go back again to a blended finance model that Nidi also talked a little bit about. And yeah, with a large governmental funding and payment for implemented activities. That's it from my side. So I would give the word to George.
So good morning, everyone. My name is George, and I'm a researcher, PhD researcher at the University of Ferrara here in Italy. So today I'm going to present a study on innovative carbon farming contracts, specifically on what it takes to design carbon farming schemes that farmers in a marginal area such as Liguria, while still delivering real climate outcomes. So I will start off by just paving the way into knowing that the agro-environmental schemes, as we all know, is a policy tool that gets farmers to deliver environmental public goods. But literature showed that they are not achieving their intended outcomes. So from the literature, we can pull out 3 reasons. There are many more. Weak targeting, that schemes are not reaching the right farmers in the right place. Second, that limited flexibility. Contracts designs are too rigid and not to adapt to local ecological and socio-economic conditions. Third, the administrative burden and the policy complexity that adds to this discouragement, especially among small farmers and part-time farmers such as Liguria. So, and we also listened yesterday, the first day, from Dr. Kristen, that she highlighted that 60% of the European food systems are already at financial risk, and 70 to 85 are uninsecured, which means that getting carbon farming contracts design right is not just a policy, whereas it is a policy question, whereas it's a food security question. So, what it takes to have an innovative contract. By definition, and drawing from a paper from Kellerman et al. In 2023, which was part of a project that this paper is also part of this study, the prospects of innovative agri-environmental contracts in the European policy context, which was a Delphi study. An innovative contract is an arrangement that incentivizes farmers to produce environmental public goods along their private production activities. So the innovation can be in the characteristics or the combination of characteristics, such as pairing result-based payment with collective schemes. So the overall aim of this study is to design carbon farming schemes that farmers will accept while still delivering climate benefits. And we also have to take into account how farmers perceive risk, effort, and control. So we measured quantifying how much money or the willingness to accept farmers required to accept such characteristics of a contract, and identify which scheme attributes such as payment type, participation, and prescription aid and encourage this adoption. So why choosing Liguria as our study? It is not randomly selected. It is chosen that because carbon farming question is something urgent over there and interesting. It's in the northwestern part of Italy with highly fragmented mountainous landscape. So the feature makes it very relevant to our case. First, it has a marginal land market activity. Second, it has a specific agricultural practices and documented susceptibility to hydrogeological instability. Third, it faces growing vulnerability to climate and human-induced changes in the Apennine Mountains, so making it a threatening to the rural heritage. So, who the parties involved are, what scheme types are covered, and how long they last. So, on scheme duration, we took into account as part of the contracts that we presented to farmers, were collective contracts, as we all know, multiple farmers working together, aiming for to deliver landscape scale outcomes, value chain contracts, and land tenure contracts, which involve landowners and land manager farmers, sometimes municipality, all working under environmental obligations. So, the duration of the scheme is 5 years, which is taken into account based on literature. So this means that based on the cap, that they are typically implemented through multi-annual contracts, we aimed at having it as 5 years. So presented farmers with a 5 years contract. What practices we took into account, so we took, and what we presented as well in our survey, reduced or no tillage, cover crops, integration of trees and landscape elements, afforestation and agroforestry, mixed livestock, conversion of arable land into permanent grassland. So all these practices were relevant to our Liguria case study. So the data collection was done through interviews and a local organization present in the area, which helped us through also Qualitrix platform. The total sample was 94 farmers and 93 participated in the choice experiment. The sample represents around 90% of farmers registered in the Regional Farmers Association over there. So in terms of specialization, we can see that the dominant farm types are permanent crops at 27%, mixed farming and arable at 19 each, and livestock 14. This is an example of a choice card presented to farmers. As we can see, we have non-monetary and monetary attributes. We went over working individually, only with other farmers or other supply chain actors, payment only based on compensation, 50-50 and 100% based on results. Level of payment went from 0, 100, and 200, and the prescription level, low, medium, and high. Before going into the choice experiment itself, we got the idea of presenting some components, statement of the contract itself, but not titling it as the contract. So we didn't tell them this is a collective contract, the collective scheme, or land tenure, or supply chain contracts. So we gave them such as random statements, and they tried to measure it through a 5-Likert approach. So from strongly disagree to strongly decreases to strongly increases. I'm gonna go over 2 examples. For example, the collective approach, we can see that the first component extracted from the principal component analysis that was used in our model, econometric model at the end, to capture heterogeneity among farmers. So farmers who score high on this component recorded strong loadings on statements related to collective agreement on environmental targets. They jointly distributing payments among participating farmers, and they prefer to have part of the payment paid upfront. This is the second also component, benefit-oriented management approach. Also, we can see groupments been done on selling products with an environmental label, higher payments when results improve, freedom to choose farming practices. The third, I'm not gonna go over it, self-assessment preference approach, And the fourth, environmental lease advocates. So, who carbon farming schemes are for and why they matter? So, the figure plots the relationship between two. We have economic dependency on farming, the share of household income, compared to the y-axis environmental engagement. We can see some misalignment between both. Some prefer to be environmentally motivated but not financially exposed, and on the other hand, financially exposed but less environmentally engaged. What kind of schemes are needed? How much time it costs to make them acceptable? So we did a willingness also here. We did a conditional logic model and also the willingness to accept. And we can see here from this graph that stricter prescriptions, it yields to have 50.47 euros per hectare as an addition. Hybrid payments to be 71. Participation with other farmers is increasing. Result-based payment also adds to this. And finally, working with supply chain actors is the highest, to around 200 euros per hectare as an addition. So the main results and the course of action. First, we can see that based on what we found, farmers are open to carbon farming schemes. Result-based payments, collective participation, and higher prescription are all significantly reduce participation unless compensated at rates that may challenge public budgets. Second, there's a structural gap between what we found in our graph before, that between environmental motivation and financial exposure in our sample. So many farmers who are willing cannot financially accept that. They cannot just take the risk to do this because, I mean, at the end, they cannot bear the financial consequences or if their outcomes fall short. This leads the way to our 3 course of action. First, we need to design carbon farming schemes around risk sharing, not just environmental ambition. Hybrid, as we already explained by my colleagues, that it also played an important role, that they can split payments between a guaranteed action-based component and a performance-linked component is found to be a promising middle ground. The CRCF points in this direction and also our results. Second, target farmers who are motivated. These are farmers whom carbon farming payments will make the biggest difference. They want to do the right thing but cannot absorb the risk. And third, use simple, supportive scheme structures like advisory services, reduced prescription burdens, transparency, easy bureaucracy. All of these should be a prerequisite for participation. So I will end my presentation with the QR code for my LinkedIn profile. I'm still a PhD student. It's an ongoing project. This was part of a project with 3 Horizon projects, Console, Contract 2.0, and Effect. And I'm open to your question at the end. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. Well, the last presentation of the session, I'm not Mayra, as you've seen. But unfortunately, my colleague is on medical leave, so I'll try to do my best for explaining our results about the adaptation of this techno-economic model for include carbon farming schemes in our project that is Carbon Farming Met. At the beginning, I want to apologize because I'm not the expert on these matters, but if you have specific doubts about these results, please address your doubts to Mayra in her email. So let's begin. Just a brief adaptation, a brief contextualization of our project and the context in the Mediterranean. So we know that the Mediterranean soils have a very vast potential for storage carbon if we manage properly the soils. But this Mediterranean soil faces very high climatic pressure and market pressure as well. So the carbon farming could be a good solution because we can deliver ecosystem services. And I know that a lot of people here, we are always pushing that carbon farming is not just carbon. Carbon farming is a kind of a complex system for deliver a lot of services. So in this way, the business of carbon farming and the business model can generate these additional incomes from different farmers, not just with offsetting. We can include insetting or this mixing mechanism. So the problem is that this adaptation depends on the farm economics, and it's not just an agronomical matter. So what are the challenges that in the Mediterranean are trying to tackling and trying to addressing on? So the carbon projects require a fixed cost that they need to pay even if you are a small farmer or a big one. So these costs are regressive, so small holders face to this higher cost per hectare, but certification fees further increase this financial burden. So our question or our main question here is what is the minimum scale that makes carbon farming economically viable? I think it's a not answered question now. But we want to addressing that questions with our project that is an Interreg Euromed funded project, and we want to develop and help the farmers to improve and to adapting this business model like carbon farming for getting these additional revenues through two different practices that maybe could be one. The regenerative agricultural practices, including agroforestry practices due to the importance of the Mediterranean context. So we want to provide the necessary tools to facilitate this insertion on the schemes. So we developed a 4 steps methodology and this roadmap. At the beginning, building a foundation, we create a common framework for the Mediterranean countries. Then we want to running and testing in different pilot sites. We are running 5 pilots in Italy and 3 more in Catalonia, Spain. And we want to connect and scale, developing these IT tools that is a specific IT platform for measure these carbon removals. And finally, we want to spread these lessons learned for motivate more regions across the Mediterranean. So a brief overview of our project. This project is led by the institution that I represent. It's it's a Beta Technological Center. We are based in the countryside of Barcelona in Catalonia. And the project started on January 2024, and it will be finished on this June. So the participation, the project involves the participation of 9 different institutions from 6 Euromed countries. So what are our main outcomes and the solutions that we want to provide with this project? The first one is this framework of good practices, I mean, a guideline for the best available practices in the Mediterranean. The business opportunities, because yes, it's not just agronomical matters. This carbon credit or carbon removals platform and a scaling up strategy for market access, creating a meeting point in the Mediterranean. So today, I just gonna go talk about the first one and specifically for our adaptation to this techno-economical model. So let me go faster. So these outcomes or these results are derived from under the task 1.5 of our project, and this report could be consulted in this link and provides this analytical basis for assessing the viability of carbon farming in the Mediterranean systems. So the methodological approach was the following. We developed a literature review using just 22 documents that they are more related with the Mediterranean condition. Then we defining the cost and categories that we need to include, basically capital expenses, operational expenses, and other costs that include another fees and another cost that I will share with you. then the data sources and what is the more trust source for getting this data. And then we structured this techno-economic analysis using basically the life cycle thinking approach and the life cycle costing, but merging with several indicators. And for comparing two different scenarios, the carbon farming with regenerative practices and the conventional ones that this could be a scenario as business as usual without the improvement practices. So the structure of our LCC is very basic in terms of we need to take into account the CapEx and OpEx, but in the other cost, we are putting all these different amounts and fees that you need to put in the carbon scheme certification. So we are including the taxes, the insurances, the certification fees, and the administrative and legal overheads. This is a brief disclaimer. We are basically working with the certification of Berre Carbon Registry, but we can take another examples, just modifying this other cost. And the proposal that we have is these three scenarios: the conventional agriculture, let's say the scenario as business as usual, then the carbon farming without developing any carbon credit, and developing carbon credit paying this certification scheme. All these procedures were automated in an R script that you can find in the link. I don't know if it's in. Yeah, it's available. The link, and we generated all these outputs that. Sorry, because I'm not the expert on that indicators, but I know that all of them can explain what is what the results have to do very promising or not. So the case study and the assumptions, as I mentioned, we are running 8 pilots in Italy, well, in Italy and Spain as well, and I don't go in deep in this in all these assumptions because I know that Mayra is using these yield ramps and these logics that needs to scale the different yields and the different outcomes from the agricultural land. And we are using binders here, so we need to develop these yield ramps because when you establish the crop, you are not, let's say, profitable at the first year. You need to develop many years for getting the results. So this study case is based in Catalonia, in Muixac Viticultors farm. This is a regenerative agricultural farm that applies all this biology-based management, and the grapes are hand harvested. And you can see their website here, and the ubication or the location of this farm is on the Empordà region, very near to the border with France in the Pyrenean Mountains. So then we construct these different CapEx and OpEx indicators, well, not indicators, CapEx and OpEx inputs. Regarding the carbon farming, we are using our data from the farm, and regarding the conventional one, we are using the statistics of the Spanish government about the vineyard production. So our preliminary results, because we need to validate this model in all our pilot farms, is that CapEx and OpEx are the main cost drivers on these systems. Carbon farming plus carbon credits shows high fixed carbon costs. It's obvious. Regenerative agriculture is more balanced due to these premium prices when we can achieve it and when we have subsidized. But without the scale, carbon credits revenues cannot offset certification MRV codes. So that is the question another time. So we developed two main questions. The first one is, what is the minimum surface that we need to put for doing profitable this business? Well, We use this consortium, so we saw that the small farms, when I see small farms is 1 hectare, and then we test with 5 hectare sector. It seems that just the aggregation dilutes this project level costs, but the benefits plateau it's always quite large. So we arrive until 135 hectares to doing profitable. That is a very large scale. So that is one of our main outcomes here. Then we have this minimum transition viable price that another time the prices of these carbon credits has to be around 200 or 100 euros per hectare. I know that this is a dream, so we need to find the solutions, and I think these results are very aligned with my colleagues that they always propose this kind of blended solutions or mixing solutions. So carbon farming, generating carbon credits becomes feasible only when the costs are diluted and carbon policies can increase. Then the minimum transition viable price, you can see that when we use conventional and carbon farming, because it's become viable at 2 and 4 hectares. When we use all these procedures, we saw that we can reduce the minimum surface in terms of the net present value that is changed to positive values in a consortium of just 40 hectares. That is more realistic data. So our idea is that carbon farming and generate carbon credits in this Mediterranean context are just an aggregated solution for, let's say, cooperatives, associations, or any consortium that they want to aggregate. So what are our limitations? We need to know that the model is very sensitive to the key inputs. We are developing the sensitive scenario analysis for validate. We need to establish these carbon assumptions because we are just thinking that the maximum amount of carbon sequestration is 4 tons per hectare per year, and the average price of carbon credits is 25 euros. We have this policy market uncertainty, and the simplifications is another limitation. So just to finalize the key takeaways of this study that Mayra conducted. The scale matters. The viability depends on both farm size and consortium size. Carbon credits alone are insufficient and at the current market prices. The aggregation is essential, at least in the Mediterranean conditions. The regenerative carbon farming schemes performs very well due to these premiums and different subsidies. And the combination of these outputs can work when costs are shared and carbon prices approach these minimum prices that we are calculating. So thank you very much. I hope that this presentation was kind of good in terms that I'm not the people who conduct the study. And I just want to invite you to our final conference in Barcelona that will be held on 28th and 29th of March. And this is the page of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Can we get this microphone back working? Oh, is it me? Thank you, George. That's good. Good to have technical people here. Thank you very much, everybody. We will now open up the floor for questions to any of the speakers. Does anyone have a question to any of the speakers? Oh, okay, sorry. On this last slide, you've got a Menti created by Nidhi, and to the right, we've got all of our LinkedIn profiles. If you want to discuss any of this with us later and don't feel like putting your question to us in this public forum. So you're very welcome to contact any of us. And on the screen is how you do it. Here, we have a question here. Oh, just a comment?
Just to say, my head. Is it on?
Yeah.
Yep.
I was saying my head is spinning actually because all of you just are kind of spot on. I think with the questions that we're working with.
I can't hear you.
Can you
Ladies?
hear me now? Closer. Kind of have to get very
That's
close,
better.
like a singer. No. So I'm from the European Investment Bank, and we're working on all these topics, particularly like funding for the nature restoration law. And certainly the conclusion that we've come to, and I think what so many others have been concluding the last 2 days, is that the stacking question is where it's at. So we've analyzed so in depth the number of ecosystems, case studies, looking at getting in the field data in certain ecosystems under the nature restoration law, seeing how it stacks up. And there's always a gap. Just like I said, I'd like to get back to all of you, really, especially you, Nidhi. I mean, that was astonishingly relevant work on contract design and how the different elements eventually fit together, and it's like the nitty-gritty. One of the ideas that we're also working with is the idea of maybe of having another kind of levy, because something that's not pure government, not pure voluntary either, taking inspiration, for example, from other sectors like the energy sector, where they have obligated parties, where energy producers have to collect money, which are then distributed through energy efficiency schemes, for example. But it was very interesting to hear about the features that such a thing would have to be, not to be called a tax.
Yeah.
So just a compliment, this is probably the best presentation I've heard last days. Anyway.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentations. My question is mostly to
Just 1 second. I can't actually hear. Could we turn up the microphone up there? Francesco, il microphone, please, per favore. A bit higher volume. We're struggling to hear.
Hello.
Perfect. Thank you.
I got a tip to put my mouth closer. So thank you for your presentations. I had a question because we were talking about the stacking of carbon credits on top of cap, but I'm pretty sure the methodologies exclude that, right? In terms of the CRCF certificates. So does anyone have a solution for how that could look like?
Let me just see if I can get this right. The idea is that you would have to find additionality, right? So as long as there's additionality, you're fine. The methodologies that aren't ready, that are being worked out currently, we don't know. So I wouldn't want to say exactly what it will look like, but the whole question around a parcel of land should realistically be able to have a variety of different activities happen on it. And the idea is that you get incentivized, so what's necessary is the economic incentive, like the activity wouldn't have happened unless this money eventuated, unless this finance came in. So that's a sort of a two-pronged test. And the other one is that it actually has an increase, like you're increasing carbon sequestration in relation to what is going on in the region, right? So how that interlinks exactly with the cap and what the cap will look like in relation to this, I wouldn't want to give a firm statement on, but the idea is definitely to be able to do several different activities on one parcel of land, and for that to function. It can't be statutorily so, like there can't be a law that says that you have to carry out the activity and then you will get, also credit for it. So that's, that's out. But the whole point is that it wouldn't have happened but for the finance coming in to fund that particular activity to have a particular result. Sorry, is anyone got something to, that they disagree with me on that, or?
I think I agree completely with you. I would just like to add a bit more, that what I envision by talking to experts and talking to their preferences is understanding that the governance layer should be the first one. So who makes the registries, who makes the certifications, who makes the compliance, followed by the public schemes, so the action, which is followed by then the making sure there's integrity in the climate, in the carbon farming schemes, and then the incentives. So the incentives should be the final layer just before we're about to apply the carbon farming project. But starting with obviously the governance and the action. So, that's most of it. Anybody else would like to add something to it?
Please.
Thanks. Bernhard Aumann from the TGO AG, the good ones AG. We also do some carbon farming practices. And from the staking prospect, it's possible to have a green bond system like with biochar and then swap weathering structures and also other stuffs. Yeah. But the price of carbon is too less. This is the main driven thing for farmers to finance carbon farming with 20 euro per ton of 1 ton of CO2. It's not possible to have a really safe MRV systems, really safe income streams for farmers. It costs much more money to make it safe. And this is the main driven thing. And from the finance prospect, I think it's really important that we bring the market as soon as possible together and to finance more money in this room. It costs us much more that some counters on these streams today. And yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, I hope that everybody got something out of these presentations. We've enjoyed working together. As you could see, we come from quite different fields, and we have everything from academia through to operators. So we've thoroughly enjoyed it. We hope you enjoyed it, and please get in touch with any of us with further questions, comments, or indeed support. Support. And we're just going to play you a little video at the end here. Nidhi, you want to press it?
Yes, but where do we press it?
George, do you have a...
No, you have to go up the door.
I can go if you want. No, you're going to go? Thank you.
It's starting.
It's starting.
but off screen. Yes.
No, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you can hear it.
We don't have sound.
It's fine.
Could we have sound, please? No, it's yeah. Ah, technology. What's his name up there? Francesco.
I'm sorry, there's no sound, but
It's meant to be this beautiful singing. And if it was in the beginning of the conference, I'd sing for you. But at the end of the conference,
yeah, she can sing very well in also Italian. It's true.
Okay. We won't get sound, I don't think. But thank you very much,
Thank you guys
anyhow,
for
for coming and participating.